In the annals of history, some moments pass by quietly, their true significance hidden from the eyes of the world. Others arrive like a thunderclap, their impact immediate and undeniable. But rarest of all are the moments that begin as a whisper and grow into a roaring echo that reshapes continents and challenges the very foundations of power. On November 2nd, 1930, such a moment unfolded in the heart of Africa. The world turned its gaze toward Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. To the great colonial powers of Europe, Britain, France, Italy, it seemed a quaint and routine affair. In the annals of history, some moments pass by quietly, their true significance hidden from the eyes of the world. Others arrive like a thunderclap, their impact immediate and undeniable. But rarest of all are the moments that begin as a whisper and grow into a roaring echo that reshapes continents and challenges the very foundations of power. On November 2nd, 1930, such a moment unfolded in the heart of Africa. The world turned its gaze toward Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. To the great colonial powers of Europe, Britain, France, Italy, it seemed a quaint and routine affair. Another coronation, another African monarch adorned with ceremonial trinkets, a footnote in the grand story of empire. They were wrong. Dangerously, profoundly wrong. For this was not merely the crowning of an emperor. It was the awakening of an ancient bloodline, a defiant challenge to colonial authority, and an event that would send a tremor of fear through the corridors of power across the globe. This was the coronation that shook the world. As dawn broke over the hills surrounding Addis Ababa, the city stirred, not with the gentle rhythm of a new day, but with the thunderous pulse of history in the making. The air itself seemed to crackle with anticipation. A symphony of sounds rose to meet the sun. The deep, resonant beat of ceremonial drums echoing from the mountainsides, the chanting of priests, and the murmur of tens of thousands of voices speaking in tongues both ancient and modern. The streets, normally pathways of commerce and daily life, had transformed into rivers of humanity, flowing towards the heart of the capital. The scent of frankincense and myrrh, burned for centuries in rituals of worship and royalty, hung heavy in the air, a fragrant mist weaving through the crowds. Banners, not of conquered provinces but of a proud, sovereign nation, fluttered in the African breeze. They were woven with threads of pure gold and crimson silk, bearing the sigil of the Lion of Judah. This was a city holding its breath. Peasants who had walked 4 weeks from distant villages stood shoulder to shoulder with nobles draped in fine embroidered cloth. Fierce warriors, their faces etched with the stories of battles fought to defend their homeland, stood beside learned priests, guardians of sacred texts. Farmers, whose hands knew the soil of this ancient land, gathered alongside scholars fluent in forgotten languages. They were not mere spectators at a pageant. They were participants in a prophecy. They had come to witness destiny unfold. They had come to see their king become their emperor. At the center of this maelstrom of devotion and hope stood a man whom the world, and especially Europe, had tragically underestimated. His name was Rastafari Mekanen, soon to be known as Haile Selassie. To the European diplomats and journalists who attended, he appeared a slight figure, quiet, reserved, almost unassuming. They watched him with a detached, paternalistic curiosity. In their private conversations, recorded in their diaries and cables back home, they whispered their dismissals. Another ceremonial king, one might have written, a symbol with no real power, a puppet for the feudal lords. They saw what they wanted to see. A figurehead for a backward nation, a character in a colorful but ultimately insignificant drama. They failed to perceive the fire behind his calm gaze, the steel in his slight frame. They misunderstood completely who stood before them. Haile Selassie was not just a political leader ascending to a throne. He was the inheritor of a sacred legacy. He claimed direct, unbroken descent from King Solomon of Jerusalem and the Queen of Sheba lineage stretching back 3,000 years, a bloodline that predated every single European monarchy still in existence. This was not a claim of political convenience. It was an article of faith for his people. A truth inscribed in the Kebran Nagust, their holy book. The man they saw as a minor king was, in the eyes of his nation, the living embodiment of a divine covenant. As the great doors of St. George's Cathedral swung open, a profound silence descended upon the city, the roar of the crowds quieting to a reverent hush. The ceremony began. This was not a performance for foreign dignitaries. It was a sacred rite, steeped in millennia of tradition. And then came the crowns. Not one, as European monarchs would receive, not 2. 7 imperial crowns were brought forth, each one a masterpiece of gold and jewels, each symbolizing a different facet of divine authority. justice, mercy, sovereignty, and the emperor's holy duty to his people and his God. As each crown was presented, golden trumpets, long and slender, sounded a celestial fanfare that seemed to pierce the very heavens. Priests, robed in magnificent vestments, began to chant. Their prayers were not in Latin, the language of Rome, nor in French, the language of diplomacy. They were spoken in Ge'ez, a sacred Semitic language, one of the oldest in the world, the tongue in which the Ark of the Covenant's arrival in Ethiopia was first chronicled. The European diplomats, seated in their tailored suits and military uniforms, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The scent of incense, the unfamiliar cadence of the ancient prayers, the sheer weight of history in the air was all deeply unsettling. This was not the primitive ritual they had expected. This was something else entirely. This was ancient power, raw and unapologetic, revealing itself before their eyes. Finally, the moment arrived. Hastafari Makoni knelt, and the Archbishop of Bunakorelos placed the primary imperial crown upon his head. He rose, no longer a prince, but his imperial majesty, Haile Selassie I, Kingi of kings, Largi of law, conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, elect of God. But what happened next is what truly stunned the world. In his first act as emperor, he did not turn to the European He did not seek their recognition or approval, as so many other rulers on the continent had been forced to do. Instead, he turned to his people and to Africa. He spoke not of accommodation, but of sovereignty. He spoke not of dependence, but of unity. He spoke of Ethiopia's destiny as a beacon of freedom and resistance against colonial domination. His words, calm yet resolute, were a declaration. In that moment, the assembled representatives of the great empires realized a terrifying truth. Ethiopia was not a client state. Ethiopia was not conquered territory. Ethiopia was not a broken nation begging for a place at the table. And Ethiopia was certainly not asking for permission to exist. It was sovereign, it was proud, and it was free. To understand why this coronation struck such a nerve, one must understand the world of 1930. The map of Africa was a patchwork of European colonies, carved up and controlled from London, Paris, Brussels, and Lisbon. From the Cape to Cairo, nearly the entire continent was under foreign rule, but there was one exception: Ethiopia. It had famously defeated a modern Italian army at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, a victory that had secured its sovereignty and sent shockwaves through the colonial world. Now, this coronation was not a battle won with guns, but with symbols. It was a powerful act of political theater that sent a silent, electrifying message to colonized peoples across Africa and the world. Freedom is possible. Sovereignty is our birthright. This was the fear that gripped the empires. Colonial governors in Kenya, Sudan, and Somalia feared that this display of black sovereignty would ignite the flames of rebellion in their own territories. Kings and emperors in Europe, already unnerved by the rise of new ideologies, feared the inspiration it would provide to anti-colonial movements. The fear was not that Ethiopia would invade them. The fear was of the idea it represented. Because if one African nation could stand tall, free and proud, with a history deeper and a legitimacy more ancient than their own, then others might begin to believe they could do the same. The ripple effect of this one day in Addis Ababa was immediate and global. It resonated far beyond the borders of Africa. In the Caribbean, particularly in Jamaica, a burgeoning spiritual and political movement took profound notice. They saw in the crowning of this African king the fulfillment of a prophecy. They called themselves Rastafarians, taking his pre-coronation name, and saw Haile Selassie not merely as a political leader, but as a messianic figure, a living manifestation of God. In the drawing rooms and parliaments of Europe, newspapers and politicians debated the meaning of the event. Was Ethiopia now a threat, a rival, or simply an anomaly to be dealt with later? The coronation forced them to contend with an Africa they did not control and did not fully understand. And across Africa itself, from the intellectual circles of West Africa to the nascent independence movements in the East, a quiet hope began to spread. The image of a black emperor, crowned in glory, became a potent symbol of Pan-African aspiration. One crown, one ceremony, one man. One moment that subtly but irrevocably shifted the tectonic plates of global history. Years later, the world would be tested. Fascist Italy, under the iron fist of Benito Mussolini, sought to avenge its humiliating defeat at Oak. In 1935, his armies invaded Ethiopia, using modern bombers and poison gas against the people armed with antiquated rifles. The world watched, and for a time, Ethiopia fell. But even in exile, the memory of that coronation haunted the conscience of the world. It was a constant reminder of what had been violated. Haile Selassie's powerful appeal to the League of Nations was the speech of a legitimate sovereign, not a conquered chief. The coronation had proven something no empire ever wanted to admit. That true, lasting power does not always come from the barrel of a gun or the size of an army. Sometimes it comes from history. It comes from legitimacy, from faith, from the unshakable belief of a people in their own destiny. And that kind of power, once it has been awakened and shown to the world, can never truly be extinguished. It can never be put back to sleep.